Weimar Republic and Hitler's Reich, as well as Italian fascism and historiography, 1922 to 1943. In the 4 years between the end of the war and the fascist coup in 1922, Italian historians hardly had time to reflect anew on the past. The historical endeavor showed a strong historicist influence in methods and approaches, particularly and partially due to Benedetto Croce's prominence, but also displayed a noteworthy openness to the social sciences. The predominant theme was still the Risorgimento and its success or failure in creating a unified Italy, as well as a liberal order. That held true, although to a more limited degree, even after 1922. Other strong fields were the histories of the regions and those periods of national pride, ancient Rome, and that of the Renaissance. Social science influences, often combined with Marxist approaches, were quite visible in Italian historical practice. In Gaetano Salvini's work on the Renaissance, the idea of class struggle had a prominent place. Early in his career, Gaiacino Volpe drew on some Marxist concepts, but while Salvini became an exile, Volpe developed into a protagonist of Italian imperialism and fascism. Yet even under fascism, again with ideological limits, Italian historiography continued to be shaped by historicist, positivist, and social scientific, as well as legal patterns. A new political order came to Italy in 1922. It was not the egalitarian state of emancipated individuals, which the progress theoreticians of all kinds had foreseen, but a totalitarian state demanding complete subservience and sacrifice from its citizens. In return, it offered stability and a sense of belonging, which many of those not used to democratic politics felt were lacking in the state of free and isolated individuals. Fascism, as Benito Mussolini and his movement demonstrated, made the historian's task both easy and difficult. It was difficult for historians to accommodate the crucial fascist assertion that the leader's will represented the incarnation of the national will and purpose. That will and its aims were timeless, with only its specific manifestations changing, and left to historians only as recitation of various expressions of the national will, which was without a true development. Quite a few historians had political and moral objections to such assertions in Italy. It was easy for historians to agree with fascism's glorification of the nation's power and greatness, and to highlight those periods of the Italian past that told of empire, war, victory, and national enthusiasm, especially the periods of the Roman Empire and that of the Risorgimento. These emphases, along with the fascist preference for the political history and the narrative form, and the fascination with great personalities, were not innovations but long-standing features of Italian, indeed of European history. Actually, even those historians who dissented from fascist views adhered to traditional historiography. They retained the traditional forms but shifted accents and interpretations away from fascist preferences. Croce did so in his histories of Naples, the Baroque age, and 19th century Europe. In them, he proclaimed his faith in liberty and progress, a libertas, however, not seen in liberal and democratic terms, but conceived of as general human creativity. Delio Cantimori defended the power of ideas, particularly those of heretics. Federico Chabad dealt with those contradictions between between power and ethics that fascism denied, and Adolfo Omadio celebrated quietly the ideals of liberalism and republicanism. Antonio Gramsci, on the other hand, who espoused a Marxist interpretation of the Italian past, paid for it with the loss of his liberty and his life. The persistence of a non-fascist bloc of scholars writing traditional historiography and a lack of a systematic fascist view on the past prevented the identification of traditional historiography with the fascist period. Thus, the years after 1944 brought the excitation of fascist ideas, but no call for a new beginning in Italian historiography. German history and historians in the Weimar Republic and Hitler's Reich. The debate about the appropriate past. German historians had slightly more than a decade to create a historiography appropriate for the new liberal democratic republic. They had to accomplish that in the wake of the overthrow of the monarchy in a country full of violent conflicts. A fervent nationalism fueled by the military defeat with its subsequent stab in the back legend and resentments against the peace treaty. Mainstream historians went on with their work in their special fields, producing accounts of excellent scholarship in the general historicist vein, but many of them, directly or indirectly, joined in the grand debate on the new balance between change and continuity in German history. More specifically, how could one construct a socially useful and scholarly pervasive nexus between the past and the present after so profound a rupture? What historical nexus could offer acceptable expectations, even hopes for the future? Would historians need the timeless admonition that German historiography must open its eyes and look at the world as it really is, not how a hierarchical isolation and arrogant self-esteem wish it to be? The general debate on how much continuity or change should be acknowledged in the new German history was closely linked to the historians' attitudes toward the new Weimar Republic. Some historians saw no possibility for a new nexus between the past and the expectations for the future, and argued for strict continuity, thus rejecting the new republic, such as Johannes Haller, George von Bellow, and Adalbert Wahl. They were of the school of thought that saw the German state as a historically grown entity with its own order in which Western liberal ideas were foreign elements. Many more historians found sufficiently strong reasons in the German past for accepting the Weimar Republic as the legitimate present and future. The most famous of them was Friedrich Meinecke, which we've mentioned earlier, who was led into the Republican camp by reason and not the heart. That issue also concerned Hermann Oncken, who had ventured into the then unusual studies of political parties and socialism. Yet as a strong nationalist, he continued to publish anti-French works. Hans Rothfuss supported the Republic, despite long sympathies for the Kaiserreich and praise for Prussian qualities such as loyalty to the state, sense of duty, and willingness to serve the state. He was one of the Königsberg scholars who conducted studies of ethnicity, albeit with a clear German bias. A similar path led Otto Hintz into the Republican camp. He had conducted innovative administrative studies in Imperial Germany, using methods that transcended the boundaries of historicism. His student Fritz Hartung, an eminent constitutional historian, proposed a mixed republican monarchical state as a guarantee of continuity. Other well-known moderates who adjusted themselves to the republic were Hans Delbruck in military history, Ernst Trotzk for intellectual history, and Hans Hertzfeld. Again, others affirmed the republic but regretted the absence of radical social reforms. Valentin wrote a history of the German National Assembly of 1848 to 1849, whose failure he attributed to the missing voices of the true advocates of a liberal order. Author Rosenberg regretted the rejection of the post-war soldiers and workers' councils in favor of the Republic as a moderate compromise. A whole group of younger historians favored the Weimar Republic, but had their careers in Germany cut short in and after 1933. Eckhard Kerr's case was especially noted because he criticized the primacy of foreign policy in history, and assented the important connections between military, business, and politics and the pre-war German naval armament effort that contributed to the enmity with England. Again, he criticized the primacy of foreign policy in history. The defeat of Lamprecht's attempts to lift cultural and social history to prominence still reverberated in German historiography. Only a small group of historians at the University of Königsberg, now Kaliningrad, including Hans Rothfuss, Werner Kantz, and Theodor Schleier, engaged in an ethnically assented social history. Its openness to sociology was unusual. After 1933, the emphasis on the Volk, or the nation, and on the German eastward expansion made it easy to adjust that history to the Third Reich's preferences. Cultural history remained a history of ideas, and great personalities were still the decision makers. Few scholars continue the work of the new German economic history, founded by Schmoller. Historiography in Hitler's Germany. With Hitler's ascension to power in 1933, the debate over the Weimar Republic ceased. That republic was officially rejected. The continuity and nature of German history was now traced to historical events, persons, and periods more akin to the ideology of Hitler's Third Reich. Hitler and the historians. German National Socialist historiography, like that of the Italian fascism in Italy, glorified the leadership principle, the nation in power. It acquired a great complexity, however, through its racism, particularly its virulent anti-Semitism, a conscious attempt to create a strictly ideological history, and a stronger push to have an official view that dominates. Still, Hitler's Germany never had an agreed-upon view of the German past. The Gleichschaltung, or the official attempt to develop uniformity, only partially succeeded in historiography, since too many agencies vied for dominance and academic institutions retained a strong voice. In the departments of history, academic routine proceeded as before, and the German Geschichte Wissenschaft, with its text criticism, or historical science, objectivity, Verstehen, which is understanding, and seminars, while not liked by radicals, remained acceptable. The most profound change came with the ouster of professions who were Jews or were ideologically suspect. Through these purges, German academic life lost some of its finest luster and some of its scholars. However, there was a successful Gleichschaltung of sorts, because many historians shared the National Socialist affirmations of a strong pan-Germanism, the central role of power in life, and the view of the state as a collective whole which must be served. They also shared Hitler's antipathy towards socialism and communism. Only much later did historians understand that to add loyalty to Hitler to those attitudes was not only a morally flawed course of action, but also a self-destructive one. In 1935, National Socialism achieved one victory in German historiography by conquering the publishing bastions outside Academy. The steering commission of the Monumenta Germaniae Historica became part of a Reichsschrift für alte Geschichte, or modern historiography, came under the Reichsinstitut für Geschichte des Neuen Deutschlands, led by Walter Frank and others. And it was forced to yield the editorship of the Historische Zeitschrift to Karl Alexander von Müller. A few years later, the war curtailed all publishing. The outlines of what German historiography would have been after a victory by Hitler were nevertheless discernible. It would have been primarily political history with a heavy accent on heroes, battles, and victories. The country's Germanic origin would have been stressed, and Prussia's contributions to building the modern Germany would have been made central. To a high degree, historiography would have been a veneration of the proper ancestors and German heroes of the past. It is doubtful, however, that the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation would have fared well, tainted as it was by its Christian mission and faith and its connection with the papacy in Italy. Only the desire to see a continuity in the German Reich would have prevented its complete condemnation. The Germanic ancestry would have been used as the link to the second major ingredient of a National Socialist historiography, that of racism. Some academic historians supported racism. Most prominent among those who did were Alexander von Müller and Ernst Kreik. Müller established a section on the Jewish problem in the Historische Zeitschrift, and Kreik spoke about the Germans in terms of racial superiority. Those were the two themes of racial historiography: the existence of superior and inferior races, and the definition of Jews as the most inferior race. National Socialists would draw for their racial theories of history on a variety of 19th century ideas, and of course, the celebration of Indo-Europeans or Aryans as the basic racial stock of Western culture, and of the social Darwinists and their talk of the European race as the fittest of all races, of course. And then the 1920s and 1930s, Hitler and his movement expounded an ill-defined but rapid racism, which declared the tall, blonde, blue-eyed North German types to be superior to people, although the term Aryan was left standing as a wider description of the superior race. National Socialists soon knew a whole gradation of good Germanic, worse Slavic, degenerate French, and the worst races, Jews. A few National Socialist propagandists and textbook writers busied themselves with demonstrating the beneficial effects of the presence of Aryan, especially Nordic, types in various cultures, even in ancient Egyptian culture, and the detrimental effects of any non-Aryan, especially Jewish, influence on German history. The word Aryan here is really, it's confusing because the ancestors to many of those who were in India, the Indian subcontinent, are what we call the Aryans. But anyways, A significant counterweight to these developments was provided by the second German historiographical establishment, that of the emigres. A sizable number of historians who left or had to leave Hitler's Germany settled in England and the United States. Among them were Ernst Kantorowicz, Symbolic Interpretations, Erwin Panofsky, Art History, Ernst Gombrich, and Hans Rosenberg. Many advanced to influential professorships and continued to work along their accustomed lines of interpretation. American historiography profited from their work through the strong impetus they gave to intellectual history. Their Ideengeschichte, or their ideas science. In a sense, they preserved German Geschichtswissenschaft, or historical science, in its purest form, but since they wrote their works in English, they only had a few of them that returned to Germany after the war, and their influence on German historiography remained modest.